Last week, about 60 rabbis were here, right next door in that room. They came together for the annual Board of Rabbis High Holiday Seminar. It's a conference which is put on by the Southern California Board of Rabbis, and they were here to talk about ideas for their high holiday sermons and also to study some of the texts related to the high holidays. It's a very frequent question, you might imagine, among rabbis at this time of year. What are you going to speak about? What's your topic? Many of them, including me, have been thinking about it for many, many months. And there is, quite naturally, a lot of pressure. We want to offer thought-provoking sermons, and sometimes it can drive you a little nuts. But I also want to tell you how much I have come to appreciate that thinking about it in advance, studying the prayer book in advance, grappling with different ideas months in advance, does something very important for me. It pushes me and all of my rabbinic and undoubtedly cantorial colleagues as well to think about the high holidays for a long time before we walk in the doors of our respective sanctuaries. Every Jew is supposed to do that. Every Jew is supposed to prepare for the high holidays. And Judaism doesn't just leave it to chance. Starting with the first day of the month of Elul, we're supposed to begin repentance in preparation for the Yamim Noraim, for the days of awe. Today is the first day of the month of Elul. Now, like everything else in Judaism, there are rituals which help us to achieve those goals. It's customary to blow the shofar every morning, the month of Elul. Some don't blow them on Shabbat, but that's a whole separate issue. The shofar is supposed to awaken our spirits and to inspire us to do what's called a cheshbon chanefesh, to search our souls. It's also the time, Elul, starting today, that we're supposed to offer and seek forgiveness. Many of you are familiar and indeed engage in the custom of visiting the graves of loved ones this time of year. It's a way to honor their memories, but it's also a way to be inspired to live lives that they aspired for you to live. There's another custom you're undoubtedly familiar with, and that's to conclude letters and emails and even conversations with the words, L'Shana Tova, a good year. You're supposed to wait to the month of Elul before you start doing that. And I look forward to Elul every year so that I can say those words, Shana Tova. Now, it is possible to simply show up at high holidays and have a meaningful experience. That's possible. It's also possible to just show up at a high holiday service and not have a particularly meaningful experience. But I'll bet you will all agree that preparing in advance creates a very different level of anticipation and of depth. Here's why, by the way, each of us should prepare, not only because it'll help make the day more meaningful. Yom Kippur is the day of judgment. We are on trial. And if we take that seriously, and I confess, I do, it induces a lot of different emotions. If you have ever been to court, and if you have ever been on trial, there's a good chance you were pretty nervous. And if you had to testify, or had to testify on your own behalf, if you had to plead your case before the judge, I'll bet you prepared a lot. Well, this is our day of judgment. We are on trial. At least that's historically how Yom Kippur has been misunderstood, and we are expected to plead our case. In fact, the High Holiday Machzor, the High Holiday Prayer Book, reminds us in a very direct way. The whole point of Machzor is to look back over the year, and that's supposed to help us to do so. And these are the words in our High Holiday Machzor at Stephen Wise Temple, and they're echoed in virtually every Machzor that I've seen. Here are the words. True, you, speaking of God, are the judge and arbiter, discerner and witness, inscribing and recording all that we have forgotten. When you open the book of records, it reads for itself, for it bears the signature of every human being. By the way, one of my teachers 35 years ago reminded me, David, when something bears your signature, there's a good chance you've read it in advance. The Machzor continues. The great shofar is sounded, the still small voice is heard. The angels, much less the people, the angels, quaking with fear and trembling, declare the day of judgment is here, for even the angels will be brought to justice. Indeed, even they are not guiltless in your eyes. Whoa. That's serious. That's heavy. This is the big test. Are we going to be inscribed in the book of life for the coming year? God is on the throne of judgment. It is meant to inspire some awe, even some fear. Do we have that? Do we have a sense of awe? I'll bet if you have college-age children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews, they're probably more nervous about their upcoming history exam than about Yom Kippur. In fact, I suspect they spend more time preparing for their history or their English test than the high holidays. And there's a good chance all of us in this room don't give enough time, focus, and thought in advance to the days of awe. Remember, they are called Yamim Noraim, days of awe. Now for some good news. God is a merciful God, and God believes we can change. In fact, God expects us to sin. Otherwise, why would God have created Yom Kippur? God knows we're going to make mistakes, and God knows we're going to sin willfully at times. Yom Kippur exists precisely because there's the expectation that we would fall short. I started using this term fall short like 15 years ago because it sounds a lot better than sin. It's a little easier on the ears, but the truth is that's what our tradition calls it. It's an aveira, it's a sin. Al chet shechatanu, for the sin which we have committed. And here's more good news. Our tradition gives us a way to make tshuva, to return to our true selves. And during the month of Elul, we are taught that while God is always accessible to us at any moment, God is especially close to us during this month leading up to the high holidays. So here are just some quick suggestions of what we can do to prepare in advance. First, let's each start with ourselves. Let's do a cheshbon chanefesh, an accounting of our soul. What part of our lives are we pleased with? Did we make changes during this last year that were good? And if so, maybe even write them down. And as we're looking back, let's also consider the parts of our lives that we hope to improve. Let's look at our deeds. In some cases, it may have been a specific act that we regretted. In many cases, it's a pattern. We're too quick to anger. Our tempers are bigger than they should be. But let's write those down as well. And then, related to that, think of the people from whom you need to seek forgiveness, and make an appointment with them and walk over to them and ask their forgiveness. By the way, it has to be specific. I can't just walk over to Cantor Lutz and say, Cantor Lutz, forgive me if I've made any mistakes or made any sins against you. I have to be specific and tell her exactly what I've done wrong. Now, I haven't committed any sins against Cantor Lutz, I hope. But there is a very sweet story that Rabbi Jack Reamer, one of the great rabbis of this generation, he's, I think, in his 90s, he lives in Florida. He writes beautifully, and I've been a devotee of his. I know him for many years. And one time he and I were speaking about sin, and he said to me, David, if I've offended you in any way this year, you're too sensitive. Kind of stuck with me. Asking forgiveness is not easy. It takes courage. But let me ask you something. Would you not have greater respect for someone who approached you and asked your forgiveness? I'll bet you would. And there's a good chance that when you ask someone else's forgiveness, they will have greater respect for you. Which takes me to my third suggestion. Make sure you grant forgiveness. If someone asks you, and you can forgive them, then do so. If they mean it sincerely, if they've made recompense, they try to make it right and ask for your forgiveness, then do grant it to them. But what if someone hurts you, really sinned against you, and does not ever even seek forgiveness? And what if that person's sin against you or harm to you looms largely in your thoughts, really affected your life in a bad way, and it sits right here in your brain? Could be a family member, could be someone in business. Your anger is justified, but sometimes it is in our interest, even if the person doesn't ask us to forgive them in your mind, because it will allow you to move on to a great degree. It's not easy. I know this personally. It's not easy. But I also know to the extent that one can do it, it can be life-changing. There is a misconception about Yom Kippur, that it's a day to seek God's forgiveness. But it's not. It's not the day of forgiveness. It's the day of atonement. As one rabbi quipped, I read this recently, if I spill my grape juice on your carpet, I can say sorry and be forgiven, but the stain remains. Atonement only comes when I get the carpet cleaners to come and clean the carpet. In other words, the goal of atonement is to fully remove the stain, to bring the carpet back to its original state. And so too with our relationships. And finally, let's all have some faith in ourselves. Despite the seriousness of the day, and it's not supposed to be a depressing day, but a serious day, what's the color that traditionally Jews have worn going on Yom Kippur? White. There is a sense of optimism because tradition believes that we can achieve genuine tshuva, make a genuine change in our lives. You don't have to show up to a rabbi's seminar to prepare for the high holidays. You don't have to go over every page in the prayer book like cantors do to prepare for the high holidays. All we need to do is to take the month of Elul seriously and embrace the idea that we are to, indeed, we should prepare in advance. And if we do, if we give genuine thought to who we are and what we've done in the year gone by, with the belief that we can always be better, if we do that, that when the sun sets on the Friday night of the Erev Rosh Hashanah, we will be ready to come before the Almighty with optimism and ready to embrace a new year. So as we begin this month of Elul, may I conclude by saying the words I look forward to saying all year. May the year ahead be filled with blessings for you and all of your loved ones. Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova.